I think that we really have a very deeply entrenched problem in terms of stereotypes and profiles that people of non-English speaking background have to basically endure in the media, particularly because just unfortunately it's a very Anglo-European white-dominated industry. We are now looking at Australia as something like 40% of people have a parent or are born overseas, and I think that that balance should really is not accurately reflected through the media, and unfortunately, a lot of that representation is very tokenistic. Some broadcasters are now putting on more multicultural entities on the front screen, not behind the screen, but in front of camera. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've definitely seen that in Channel 10 with the project, where you've got a very non-Anglo face presenting, or one of the co-presenters on the show, and he also has to be he also happens to be Muslim background. So that's I suppose a first for Australia. But we also saw that slowly, coming in the 90s, but unfortunately that was limited to just SBS television, whereas now it's coming into the mainstream commercial channels and including the ABC. What I found with the way Waleed Aly has projected his persona across to the public has really broken down a lot of barriers about, particularly about Muslim men, because he comes across as very balanced, very intelligent, and a lucid thinker. I think he has gained a lot of respect, and he's not only kept it to television, he's been involved in radio and print, and so we see his thoughts and ideas coming across, and I think it really connects with a lot of people in the community. So this has been, I think, a very important breakthrough for the Muslim community to be able to break down those misconceptions and stereotypes about Muslims. We've had comedians, for example, Nazim Hussain, Amar Rahman, and we've had Muslims on TV in shows like Amazing Race and in MasterChef. So those I suppose in the last 3 or 4 years have broken down some of those stereotypes and assisted in not just for Muslims but also broader migrant communities being represented in mainstream TV. Look, I've worked in the industry quite for some time, and my own assessment of it is that I think that it's a very, the media industry itself is a very, I suppose, exclusive industry, and for people to be involved in that industry, it becomes quite protective to maintain your power, your position of influence, and it's very competitive. So I can understand why certain people will try and maintain that sort of competitive edge, and for people of non-English speaking background to break into that, it's really difficult. The people in power are those who are not of that background. They're usually white, Anglo background, and so they make the decisions, and they deliberately choose. If they want a Waleed Aly, it's up to them. It's not up to Waleed Aly to there's hundreds of Waleed Alys out there, but how many Waleed Alys are going to make it into that? It depends on the power frame and structures that exist that choose who goes through and who doesn't. And we've seen that now with some multicultural faces in some of the in the drama series on TV, where we've got people who, you do have to have a certain look and a certain background. They won't just, like Greeks and Italians have been slowly, coming through and it's becoming mainstream. But now we're looking at Lebanese and we're looking at African or people of African background, but it usually, unfortunately, it's the lighter skinned Africans that are getting through. So this is a transitional period for us, but I think that what really needs to be made, changes really need to be made, at a philosophical and policy level. Mm-hmm. At the moment, that's not there. We're at the whim of just a handful of people, women and men in suits, usually white people, who make these decisions about who's in and who's out, and I feel that's really a shame. And I'm seeing that happening in SBS as well. I feel that SBS has gone backwards in terms of its multicultural nature and its outlook and its the message that it's trying to portray. Mm. At the risk of trying to pander to the mainstream, they've made so many sacrifices and betrayed that whole ideology of promoting the disadvantaged voices and the marginalised voices. So that's one problem that I've seen. But in mainstream TV and in the ABC, we're seeing these tokenistic sort of voices and images appearing, but I don't feel that I feel it's disingenuous at this point in time. But I think that I'm hopeful that as we get younger people moving into the sector and taking positions of influence, managerial roles, I think that might change. I think the government should be actively promoting a sort of a diversity in the media. I think that's an important part of it. But I also think that what I'd really like to see is the government supporting scholarships for people of multicultural backgrounds, particularly coming out of places like Western Sydney and Northern Melbourne and other places where they can really encourage and support young people from NESB backgrounds who live in areas where they're not normally promoted, especially media is not promoted amongst a lot of, for example, Muslim communities. And we need to get more young people who are coming from that background. But it's hard when financial decisions, usually influence their career choices. And we need to get out of that mentality, and I think the government can play a role in promoting that. I mean, we had a bit of affirmative action here in Australia a while back in the 90s, and now everything seems to have changed into more corporate style. People are not as active in that area. I think we should bring that back. But I do believe that really the government, affirmative action it should be embedded in the government policies on all areas, both not just in media, but also in education and in other sectors such as emergency workers and politics. But I think that really the key area that I would like to see is funding being put into promoting the arts amongst non-English speaking background, particularly new and emerging communities from Middle East and South Asia as well as Africa. So I'd like to see that funding induction and also scholarships and awards and things like that being put towards that type of activity. Well, I think that if we don't start somewhere, this issue will take a long time. We need to have some type of catalyst, and we need to have the public discourse out there because it's an issue that not many people will think about or talk about. I think that if you leave it in the hands of the current status quo, they're going to say, well, we'll decide when that changes, but it's up to us to make that change. And so by having this type of conference and other activities surrounding the public discourse, I think is really critical for that change to start to take place. And we need to have this discussion. For example, we need to engage with key policymakers and managers in the media. And also we need to get the government politicians to come in and engage in a dialogue, listen to the community voices, listen to the community leaders, and actually I think there should be an important component, should be a youth segment of young budding media people who are studying journalism or who've just graduated. Let's hear them and hear what they have to say.